It's time!
What is kicking, everybody? Pickin Fights Tom here for another episode of Pickin Fights. Coming to you solo dolo today. Schedules just didn't line up. Busy people, busy things, a lot of things going on, but that doesn't mean that I'm not going to take some time out of my day to break down UFC Fight Night Luque versus Dos Anjos coming up this weekend, August 12th, 7 p.m. Eastern, out of the UFC Eastern, 7 p.m. Eastern time, out of the UFC Apex. I really wish we would get back out of these Apex cards. I don't think there's a reason for them anymore, especially with everything opened up, COVID in the rearview mirror. I don't understand why we're continuing to do the Apex other than it just being a money grab. I think the tickets there go for something in the exorbitance. I don't think you're going to find them in the hundreds. You're going to find them for the thousands. So I think cost to benefit ratio, they ended up making a lot of money from selling out those. Maybe offset by the fact that they don't have to travel, and who knows what it is. It's probably a financial decision. Dana White has said many months ago that they want to cut down on the Apex and get out and travel more. We haven't gotten a Tuesday night or a Wednesday night fight card in some time. So just interesting to see where we're going to go with that. Conversely, we get some cards that just aren't as strong, so you kind of can't have your cake and eat it too. You want to have a bunch of strong cards. You would have to consolidate maybe less fight nights. I don't know. It depends on which way. But there's a lot of stuff to talk about today. We had the Sandhagen and Font fight last night that just ended up being very lackluster. I was telling everyone who would listen how exciting it's going to be to watch Corey Sandhagen go out there and style on somebody who has a one-dimensional style approach. We got a grappling game that could have been impacted from the fact that Corey Sandhagen, as he said, had an issue with his tricep. He didn't want to pull out of the fight. So he wanted to put the fight on for the fans, goes in there, wrestles, fans boo. So he found it ironic that he was getting booed for being in there for the fans. So regardless of how that went, I think overall there were some, interesting things that happened in the card. We got some knockouts that maybe we didn't expect. We got some knockouts that maybe we did expect. I saw a lot of handicappers were going 11-1, 12-0, I think 10-2. On last night's card. So pretty predictable, but I thought it was pretty entertaining aside from the main event. You also had Jake Paul taking on Nate Diaz. I think that one went pretty much about as expected. I didn't anticipate the full knockdown that Jake Paul got on Nate Diaz, although I guess it is to be expected with Nate Diaz getting older and obviously going to have a relative speed disadvantage and definitely a power disadvantage. But, I was watching that fight with a lot of people who hadn't watched a lot of Nate Diaz fights, and they were like, wow, Nate doesn't look interested. Nate doesn't want to be there. Nate doesn't look fit. Nate's getting his head punched off, and all of these things that is pretty indicative of a Nate Diaz fight, and the fact that, especially as of late, Nate Diaz is going to wear his opponent out with his face. Once they get tired, then it'll come on. Boxing, obviously a lot different than MMA when you have 5-minute rounds. And if you gas out and you're tired after, a minute and a half, that other 3.5 minutes of that round is just going to drain you. And you could only get so much of that back in the 1 minute break between the rounds. So I think with Jake Paul only having 3-minute rounds, he was able to regain his stamina. So, at the end of, I think it was the second where he started getting things put on him, the third, I think 7th and 8th, definitely towards the end of the fight, he was, the final minute was all Nate Diaz. The first minute and a half was all Jake Paul. And then there was, a little bit of back and forth during that middle minute. So, each round seemed pretty similar. It followed the same formula, especially as it went on. I would be interested to see if that went into 11th or 12th round, like what would have happened. Nate Diaz doesn't lose fights. He just runs out of time. So I think that definitely applies here. He got some good shots in there. And there was definitely a point, I think it was in the 8th or the 9th round, where Nate Diaz was really laying it on Jake Paul. So then Jake Paul laid on Nate Diaz, and it took at least 7, 8, maybe 9 seconds to separate Jake Paul from laying on Nate Diaz. But they said they were going to run it back. They were going to do some MMA, and Nate, in typical Nate fashion, mentioned, hey, I got a single leg in the first and I got the guillotine in the 9th. So I already beat him in MMA. So typical Nate Diaz, and being able to knock him down, or not knock Jake Paul down, because that didn't happen, but being able to get some good punches in, and then, put up the guns to the crowd and act like he doesn't care. He's mastered the art of winning even when he loses. So interesting to see what happens with Nate Diaz. He said he wants to do the MMA fight with Jake Paul. He said he wants to go back to MMA and probably go back in the UFC. So going to be really interested to see what happens with him. We know Nate Paul Jesus Christ. We know Jake Paul says a lot of things. We know Nate Diaz says a lot of things, especially Nate Diaz, that don't necessarily come to fruition. So it's hard to say where this is going to go. But nevertheless, let's get into UFC Fight Night, Luque versus Dos Anjos. This was a card that has flown a little bit under the radar. I didn't even really realize that this was approaching, and then I had to go and break down and look at the actual card to realize who's on it. Not a whole lot of notable names. You got Terence McKinney stepping in, I believe, on short notice to take on Mike Breeden. And now this is listed on the prelims here. I can't imagine Terence McKinney's going to be on the prelims of a card that is lacking such notoriety and star power. But then again, Terence McKinney is coming off of 2 losses. One, I think, was only 2 or 3 weeks ago. So this is going to be an interesting fight for him. He got, that was it. He got submitted 2 weeks ago by Nazim Sadikov. He wasn't looking great in that fight. He did lose to Ismail Bonfim by the flying knee. Didn't look great in that fight either. Was able to get a submission over Eric Gonzalez. He lost to Drew Dober in a back and forth fight where he was looking good at first. Terence McKinney had all of this hype train following him, and then just getting the loss to Drew Dober. He didn't lose a ton of the hype because he was out there winning, and Drew Dober is known for his Giga Chad chin. So, that one, he didn't lose much stock, got another win, submission style. So, the hype train was back on, and then Ismail Bonfim is just a buzzkill. And Nadim Sadikov is definitely a bump in the road that Terence McKinney wasn't expecting to happen. So grappling has definitely been an issue for him. But with that being said, I don't think he's going to be presented with the same type of issues against Mike Breeden. I think it is going to be a largely standing battle. If it does go to grappling, I think, Terence McKinney may still have that weakness when it comes to grappling, when it comes to Mike Breeden, if they decide to go there. But I really, think this is going to be more of a stand-up battle. I think this is a opportunity for Terence McKinney to right ship here. He's a little bit younger. He's a little bit longer. He's going to be quicker. He's going to have more power than Mike Breeden. Breeden on a 2-fight losing streak, 34 years old, end of his career, or approaching that, certainly. And at 28 years old, I think Terence McKinney is still entering his prime. He's got a lot to learn. I don't think he's been fighting forever. I think this is something relatively new to him that he picked up and was really good at. So I think T-Rex is looking to right the ship here, and that's where I would place my money in terms of these prelim notables. Also on this card, we have Josh Parisian taking on Martin Buday. I'm taking on Martin Buday all day. I just don't think there's any instance where I could really bet on Josh Parisian and feel good about it. I know he is 2-3 over his last 5. Moving, he's at 266. He's not an athletic 266. Buday isn't the most fit 266 either, but definitely more in shape. Looks more like an athlete, somebody who takes their career seriously more than Josh Parisian does. Josh Parisian has had losses and goes up to the guys who he loses to and asks them to teach him a move, which you would think is intelligent of a fighter to do. You just got tapped out to something, go and learn that from the guy who tapped you out. But it also just comes across a little bit as a weak move. To when you got tapped out by something you didn't even know existed at the highest level of mixed martial arts competition. I just don't know if that should be happening in the heavyweight division. You should be prepared for anything or almost anything that people are going to throw at you. And, when you're learning a rear naked choke or you're learning an Ezekiel choke, which is, basic or maybe if it's not level 1, it's level 2. If you don't know that and you want to get tips from somebody after the fight when you just lost to that, I don't know if it's the time to do it. It just seems like a bad look. And that's something that I feel like we've seen from Josh Parisian. So Josh Parisian, I can't take him here. He hasn't given me much to even look forward to. Split decision win over Rick Martinez and Alan Badeau, and neither of those guys are particularly any good either. Loses to Parker Porter, Dontel Mays, and Jamal Pogues. None of those guys are particularly any good either. 5-fight winning streak for Martin Buday, 2-1, 31 years. Takes his career extremely seriously. Hasn't fought a ton of great competition inside or outside of the UFC, but he does have the win over Chris Barnett, Lucas Bresky. He got a split decision win, and Jake Collier. So we're not talking about the best competition, but at least he's going out there. He's getting the job done against these guys. I think he's the more well-rounded fighter. I think he's the more competent fighter, and I think he's got more going for him at this point. So I'm going with Martin Buday to get it done. And honestly, because it is such an abbreviated card, there's also Marcus McGee taking on. Oop, I hit the wrong button. Marcus McGee taking on JP Bays, and I'm going to actually go with Marcus McGee here. JP Bays, young savage, 3 losses, not really working out for him so well inside the UFC. He won on the Contender Series, and then fighting Bruno Silva, Montel Jackson and Cody Durden. 2 of those were knocked out. Cody Durden's not the best knockout loss. He did take a year off, so it's interesting to see what he's going to look like coming back. Most recently weighed in at 126 pounds, and this is a bantamweight fight. So I believe Marcus McGee, in his most recent fight against Journey Newsom, was at a catch weight, in which he did get the win. Submitted Journey Newsom via rear naked choke. That's not anything to scoff at. It was his first UFC fight, and he took it on short notice, and he did go out there and he looked good and got the win, which is something you can't say about everybody. And the fact that he's training at a good gym, he's going to have the reach advantage, he's going to have the size advantage, he's going to have the experience advantage, or maybe not the experience, but he's going to be a little bit of the older guys, knowing he's got to put his foot on the gas. And just when it comes to the actual X's and O's, I think he, fights like a little bit like a maniac. He's a little bit all over the place. He can knock people out. He can submit people. You have to be very careful when you're fighting Marcus McGee. And I think JP Bays, at this point in his career, losing to Cody Durden, a sloppy performance against Montel Jackson, and getting that counter right from Bruno Silva. Bruno Silva, I'm not even sure if he's in the UFC anymore. So just not a lot of positivity coming out of the corner of JP Bays. So I'm going to have to go with Marcus McGee here, the maniac, in his second UFC fight, this time first time with I believe a full camp. I believe he's going to get this done, and the people on Tapology agree with me too. So those 3 fights are my 3 picks for the prelim notables, prelim locks. And with that being said, because I'm on my own, I'm going to head out to the main card picks, if you don't mind. So first fight on the main card, at least as it stands now, according to Tapology, is Josh Fremd taking on Jamie Pickett. And the reality of this situation is that Jamie Pickett is just really not that great of a fighter. He's lost 3 of his last 5. The 2 wins in his last 5 are Laureano Staropoli and Joseph Holmes. Joseph Holmes, we like Joseph Holmes in terms of the show, but in terms of his UFC career, just not hasn't been going to plan, hasn't seemed to be a good fighter, hasn't really found his footing in terms of getting he's a stand-up fighter and hasn't been getting the stand-up success that he's been looking for. And then when it comes to grappling, clinch, he's definitely left a lot to be desired. So Joe Holmes, a win over him for Jamie Pickett, but after that, it's really went downhill. Level of competition, Kyle Dawkins, Dennis Talulin, and Bo Nickel. Obviously, Bo Nickel is going to go in there and do what Bo Nickel does, but he got knocked down initially by Bo Nickel, which I know more and more people are doing, but it doesn't come across as somebody who's a high quality UFC caliber striker. Getting knocked down by Bo Nickel, right away, and then getting submitted. I mean, the submitted you can let go, but Dennis Talulin knocking him out with knee to ground strikes, and Kyle Dawkins having his way with Jamie Pickett as well. I think Jamie Pickett getting a little bit up there in age now. He is going to have the longer reach here, but he's not necessarily going to be the bigger fighter. And I think Josh Fremd is just showing a little bit more of an ability to get things done. Now, granted, Anthony Hernandez and Tresean Gore, the losses, Tresean Gore doesn't look that great. Anthony Hernandez, a little bit better of a loss, but he looked really, really good in his submission win via guillotine choke over Cedric Dumas. And really, that's the main reason why I'm going to go with Josh Fremd here. I think he's a little bit more well-rounded. He's younger. He's learning. He's going to be a little bit bigger here. And I just haven't liked what I've seen from Jamie Pickett. Jamie Pickett, he doesn't really have a ton of power. He doesn't have a really well-rounded striking game. He can win in fights where the opponent is a worse striker than him, and I don't think that's the case here against Josh Fremd. I think Josh Fremd has a lot of energy. He throws a lot of volume. He throws a lot of punches, but mixes in the leg kicks, and if he has to, he can clinch with you and go to the ground. And I think Jamie Pickett, even though he's big and strong, and he might be able to use that strength to defend some of the takedown approaches, I think as the fight goes on, Josh Fremd is going to have a little bit better of a gas tank. Jamie Pickett is probably going to gas, as we've seen happen fairly recently. So for all those reasons, and obviously the minus 310 favorite, all leading me towards saying Josh Fremd is going to get this one done here. And Tapology also agrees. I just think that Jamie Pickett is not that great on the ground, not super well versed, and especially as he gets tired, you're going to see Josh Fremd take over. And I think Jamie Pickett is going to give something up, and Josh Fremd is going to capitalize and get it done. So that's the first fight on the main card. Moving up to the second fight is going to be Tafon Chickwe taking on AJ Dobson. And this card has a lot of fighters coming off of losses here. So we have AJ Dobson coming off of 2 losses, 2 and 5 over his 2 and 3 over his last 5. His wins outside the UFC over Wesley Golden, 6 and 10 submission, and Kalayan Hill, 4 and 1 by TKO. And this we're talking 4 years ago. So not a ton of activity from AJ Dobson early in his career. Got on the Contender Series almost 2 years ago. Got a submission win there, and then hasn't had anything really go his way. Tough draw with Jacob Malkoun, and then Armin Petrosian right off the bat. Both pretty solid strikers inside of the UFC. He's plus 120 here, 31 years old, 185 pounds, 6'1" with a 76-inch reach, training out of Carlston Gracie team in Ohio in Immoral Martial Arts, which I guess he goes back into back and forth to. Tafon Chickwe is a guy who's coming down from 205 pounds. He has been knocked out fairly recently by Carlos Olberg a year ago, so not fairly recently, but he has been knocked out at 205 pounds twice, and the second one, or the first one rather, by Asmat Mirzakhan, flying knee. His wins are over a guy like Jamie Pickett, and we just talked about, how lackluster performances Jamie Pickett is and maybe where he might stand inside of the UFC rankings. And another win over a guy named Mike Rodriguez. Losses to Jin Young Park, Asmat Mirzakhanov, Carlos Olberg. He loses when it comes to grappling. He loses when it comes to striking sometimes. He is going to be big. It's going to be interesting to see how he looks at 185 pounds. He has taken that year off to potentially diet down, so he will be able to make the weight. But I think AJ Dobson is going to realize that his UFC career is on the line here. I think maybe Tafon Chickwe a little bit too, but perhaps the UFC, understanding that he's going to be at a new weight class, will almost build in one extra fight for him should this not go his way, but he looks competitive. I just think AJ Dobson is going to be a little bit faster at 185 pounds. He has the ability to knock people out. He hasn't shown it necessarily inside of the UFC yet. But he has the ability to knock people out. Tafon Chickwe has been knocked out before, and then having to deal with a little bit more of the weight cut or a little bit less mass on him, I think could potentially hurt him in terms of his overall chin ability. Being at 28 years old, it is not impossible to think that Tafon Chickwe took the weight off in a solid way. I mean, it is only 20 pounds, but I just think being at a new weight class for Tafon Chickwe, having some chin issues, having some defensive boxing issues is what really kind of led him to being knocked out, I think is the concern here. For a guy like AJ Dobson, who had a tough draw with Jacob Malkoun and Armin Petrosian, he's shown he's got a pretty solid chin. He shows he can stand in there and bang. He shows he's quick with the hands and the feet. And I just think he has a much more advanced level of striking than Tafon Chickwe did. I think Tafon is going to be a little bit slow compared for 185 pounds comparatively to his level at 205. And when he's not really known for his stand-up ability at 205, I'm a little concerned for you at 185 against a guy like AJ Dobson, who's going to have a bigger frame to begin with. And now you have Tafon Chickwe, who's going to be dealing with a little bit less muscle mass. So just concerning on a lot of fronts. I see him as a slight favorite here, so I'm not exactly sure why. Tapology, though, more in line with me, 66% going on him with 57% by TKO. So I like AJ Dobson to get this one done. And I would say he probably knocks down Tafon Chickwe in the second round, but I don't know if he actually ends up getting the finish. I think Tafon Chickwe maybe come out and having a bit of an adrenaline dump in that first round because he's at a new weight, and he's also, has 2 losses over his last 3 fights, 3 over his last 5. So he's got every reason to try and come out fast in this new weight class and maybe fighting for his UFC career here. And I think AJ Dobson being comfortable at the weight, knowing he's going to be the quicker fighter and he's had the ability to put people out in the past, I think he's going to be a little bit more reserved and be able to take this fight into the second and the third. I think it ultimately goes to decision, but I think AJ Dobson is going to be your decision winner by 2 rounds, maybe all 3. It depends on if Tafon Chickwe can actually get one in there and use some of that 205-pound power and touch AJ Dobson. But I'm not going to be betting on that. I'm going with AJ Dobson to get it done by decision. Moving up the card, we have Pollyanna Vienna taking on Yasmine Luceno. Yasmine Luceno, she burst onto the scene. She had this is what it was. She burst on the scene. She had a really good back and forth fight with Yasmine Uruguay. Both of those women looked really good, even though Yasmine Luceno lost. I think both of those women left that fight with their stocks raised. And then her next fight after that was against Brogan Walker, in which she got unanimous decision victory. I like Yasmine Luceno's ability to fight stand up, although a lot of those were at 115 pounds or was at 126 pounds. So now she's moving down to 115 pounds. So it's interesting to see how that cut's going to affect her and how she's going to look at 115 pounds. She is only 21 years old. So, you would think if any age gives you the pliability to be able to fluctuate weights, it would be the younger you are. She's going to be a little bit smaller here, but she's definitely, I think, going to have the advantage when it comes to aggressive striking. Pollyanna Vienna has decent striking. She strikes from range. She uses kicks, and she'll sometimes jump in there and put an elbow. But really where she dominates is on the ground. She is a jiu-jitsu fighter, and she has submitted people multiple times in her history. She's just coming off a knockout win over Jin Yu Frey, in which she looked really good. She had the loss to Tabitha Ritchie, and Tabitha Ritchie does have a pretty solid ground game, but she had the 2 wins over Mallory Martin and Emily Whitmire, both by submission. And then she lost via submission to Veronica Hardy, but that was 3 years ago. Ultimately, this is a tough fight to call, as all of UFC women's fighting is. I'm actually going to lean with Yasmine Lucindo here. But I think betting-wise, I would want to abstain from this because really anything can happen. Yasmine Lucindo can use her volume to overwhelm Pollyanna Vienna on the feet, and you can get a TKO. You can have Polly Vienna on the ground, submit Yasmine Lucindo. But Lucindo is no slump when it comes to the ground game as well. And especially being 21, it seems like she is advancing really quickly. So I'm going to go with Yasmine Lucindo. She is minus 190. I think Tapology is more on Pollyanna Vienna to win by decision. 19% saying submission. I just don't know if the submission game that Pollyanna Vienna possesses is going to have enough in it to submit Yasmine Lucindo. And also, I don't think Vienna, she doesn't have a very damaging ground control. She can be on the ground and she can go for submissions, but she's not throwing a lot of punches. She's not doing a lot of damage on the ground. So that's something that I would take away from Pollyanna Vienna. And then when it comes to stand-up, I'm going to go with Yasmine Lucindo because even though Yasmin Uruguay, I believe, just got knocked out, she did show a lot of promise. And Yasmine Lucindo is 21 years old, so she is prone to making mistakes, but I think she's also going to have that extra that extra rope to be able to learn from those mistakes. So I'm going with Yasmine Lucindo, though I would actually say if you're going to bet on this one, don't. Moving up the card, we have our whatever you would call before the co-main event, our co-main, our tertiary main, whatever it is. Khalil Roundtree taking on Chris Dawkins. Chris Dawkins moving down from the heavyweight division to fight at 205 pounds. Chris Dawkins always known as someone who had a little bit of extra weight on him that maybe he didn't need. So it's going to be interesting to see how in the last 7 months he's taken that off. He's been knocked out by Jairzinho Rozenstruik, who's got power. He's been knocked out by Curtis Blades, who, that was on the ground, right cross onto the ground. Curtis Blades is where he thrives. And then, obviously, locked to Darius Lewis. But obviously a loss there to Derek Lewis, and Derek Lewis doing what Derek Lewis does in terms of knocking people out. He's got the win over Shamil Abdurakhimov and Alexei Olenek, which really none of those are shining wins that you would really write home about. Khalil Roundtree is a big guy. He used to fight at 265, fights now at 205. He's just jacked. Has a loss to Jan Kutalaba, has a loss to Marcin Prachnio, but over his last 3, Modestas Bukauskas, Carl Roberson, and Dustin Jacoby, he's looked pretty good. Dustin Jacoby is a stand-up kickboxer. He was a little lackluster in that fight, but Khalil Roundtree was still able to go in there with the kickboxer and get the win, even if he maybe didn't deserve it or as close as it may be. I think Chris Dawkins is he's a stand-up fighter. He's a boxer, and that's really all he has going for him. Khalil Roundtree having the power, having some experience, having some quickness. I just think that Khalil Roundtree is going to be able to get this one done here. I don't think Chris Dawkins is going to have much for him. Again, he's a boxer pretty much by trade, but he's not that great at it. He took advantage of some guys in the heavyweight division that just maybe didn't belong at the level of MMA that the UFC is. So I think Chris Dawkins benefited from that. I think Khalil Roundtree, even though I don't think that he is a top UFC heavyweight or light heavyweight either, ranking in at number 15 right now. I just think that he is going to be a little bit more well-rounded at 205, a little more used to 205, and he's most importantly not coming off of 3 knockout losses and having a questionable chin. He does have some solid power when he does land. Khalil Roundtree doesn't throw a ton, though. He is a little bit reserved with his fighting style, and perhaps that does come from all of the muscle mass that he carries. But I think Chris Dawkins isn't super well equipped in terms of the main point of his game is striking, and I don't think even his boxing is that phenomenal. I think it's going to be I think Khalil's going to have the power advantage. I don't think Chris Dawkins is going to knock out Khalil Roundtree. I don't think Chris Dawkins is going to submit Khalil Roundtree. I don't think he's going to spend much time on the ground at all, and if it does, I think Khalil Roundtree probably using the muscle is going to be able to lay on him a little bit. I'm going to go with Khalil Roundtree. Actually, when it does come to ground, no, because Kyle Dawkins is the Dawkins brother with the ground game. Chris Dawkins has some okay ground game, but again, really not a very well-rounded fighter anyway. I believe he's a cop or a fireman, and it's hard to tell if the UFC is his main thing. I think he was part-time being a cop or a fireman when he was winning, and then he stopped to decide to focus on MMA, and then he ended up losing. And I think maybe it was a combination of a level of jump up in competition, and maybe this is just something that he's really good at, but not professionally elite at. And that's what it boils down to. So I'm going to go with Khalil Roundtree, minus 200, moderate favorite here. Roundtree, 86% of Tapology, expecting him to get the knockout here. Chris Dawkins just doesn't have the chin that we can trust. Cutting extra weight here, maybe slimming down will have an effect on him. But at this point, I just can't pick against history. Co-main event time, Cub Swanson taking on Hakeem Dawud. And this is a really interesting fight. Cub Swanson getting back in there. He's 39 years old in 9 months, so really approaching 40 fast. Both of these guys are going to have a very similar frame. Hakeem Dawud is going to be the faster fighter, 100%. Now, maybe if Cub Swanson was 34 years old, he might be the faster fighter, but I just think age is going to be the biggest factor in this fight. Cub Swanson coming off a knockout from leg kicks against Jonathan Martinez 9 months ago. Hakeem Dawud does have some solid leg kicks, but not like Jonathan Martinez does. The last win for Cub Swanson against Darren Elkins, and then Daniel Pineda, before that Chrome Gracie. So not fantastic wins as of late. Hakeem Dawud, 32 years old, has had an up and down career in his own right. 10 months ago, he had a back and forth fight with Julian Erosa, which I thought he actually did well. Julian Erosa is a hard fighter to fight because he does have such long arms. He's like the opposite of a T-Rex. A T-Rex has short little scrawny arms that don't fit his body. Julian Erosa has these long Mando praying mantis style arms that just like jab out there and can really be a challenge for fighters. And Hakeem Dawud, even though he did get the loss, he did do a good job of getting on the inside and working with that. He's not going to have anything like that to deal with Cub Swanson here. And I think he's going to be the faster fighter. I think at this point in his career, he's going to possess a little bit more power. I don't think Cub Swanson's going out there and finishing Hakeem Dawud. I think everything is in the Dawud corner. He's going to be faster, have a little bit more power. I don't see this going to the ground. I like Hakeem Dawud. I like some of his leg kicks. I think he's going to get this one done. Simple as that. And finally, main event time. Vicente Luque, the silent assassin, taking on RDA, a staple in the 155-pound division, moving up to 170 now. I think RDA has always kind of fluctuated back and forth. This is going to be a really, really interesting fight because Vicente Luque is a guy typically known for his chin and his exciting fights. But recently he, was taken down and controlled by Malal Muhammad, and then he was actually knocked out by Jeff Neal. He's gotten wins over Michael Chiesa, in which Chiesa was winning that fight due to the ground game and got a little sloppy. And then there was a scramble ensued, and then boom, Luque locks up a Darce choke and gets Chiesa out of there. Other wins come by Tyron Woodley by Darce, and then Randy Bound by knockout. Vicente Luque does have that sneaky Darce. He does have extremely long arms for having a 5'11 frame. He's going to have the 76-inch reach here. I don't think the Darce is something that's going to be in play against RDA. Naturally, RDA is going to have a really good grappling and jiu-jitsu game. And that was put on display even against Colby Covington, and where there was a lot of boxing, but he was able to thwart any wrestling or takedown attempts there. RDA, even though he's 38 years old, has put on some pretty solid performances as of late. 7 months ago, finishing Brian Barberena by submission. Brian Barberena was like a legend killer for a period of time there, taking on exclusively older guys who were on their way out of the UFC, and potentially RDA was slated to be another victim to the Brian Barberena hype killing machine, but he didn't let it happen. Before that, he had a loss to Rafael Fiziev via TKO from a left hook. He has a win over Renato Moicano and Paul Felder. The Renato Moicano fight was on short notice. I mean, for a 38-year-old fighter, I think RDA definitely still has it. But in this one, it's just hard to say because Vicente Luque, even though he does have the Darce, he is not what I would necessarily call accomplished on the ground or a submission artist by any means. Grappling is going to go to RDA. RDA on the feet has a really almost a Colby Covington-esque style where he's going to pressure you with jabs and punches. He's a boxing heavy style, but he will throw in the leg kicks. Vicente Luque, for the longest period of time, got by on the fact that he had this fantastic Chad looking chin, and you can see it right there. he had this fantastic chin that, he was able to basically just utilize to be able to take one and then give one back and create these exciting fights that, he's understanding that he may not always win this exchange, but the fans are going to enjoy it. And that's what's going to propel him to main event slots and being a fan favorite and making more money. Ultimately, it is called prize fighting for a reason. You're trying to win a prize, that prize being money or a belt. Sometimes you can do both. Sometimes people pick one. Vicente Luque, he picked money, and it looks like he is a fighter who's wild. And I think against RDA, who is the opposite of wild. RDA is very calculated, doesn't take unnecessary risks. I'm going to lean slightly with RDA. The only thing that's really giving me pause is just the age difference here. I think Vicente Luque is probably going to be a little bit faster at this point in his career and probably possess a little bit more power. But like I said, RDA, typically someone who has a pretty solid stand-up defense, pretty decent ability to get out of the way of punches. And Vicente Luque is a guy who puts himself in harm's way in order to get into a firefight. And I just think RDA is going to be a little bit too keen to that, know it's coming, and being able to rely on his experience to weather that storm. And especially it being a 5-round fight, I think RDA is definitely better equipped to win the longer the fight goes. I think Vicente Luque is going to maybe try and get something quick, or if something good happens initially, he's going to try and pounce and get RDA out of there, which could result in an adrenaline dump of sorts. So Vicente Luque is the wild fighter, but the younger fighter. I think RDA probably possesses more skills, but less, probably more skills, more intangibles, but less speed and power. I think Vicente Luque probably has the attributes, but not as much the skills. And in this one, I'm just going to go with IQ is what's going to be the difference maker. I'm going to go with RDA at the ripe old age of 38 years old, getting it done and putting Vicente Luque on a 3-fight losing streak. I know a lot of people are going to be upset to hear that and to see that. Tapology is going against me. They think Luque is going to actually get RDA out of there. I can't off the top of my head think about the last time that RDA was knocked out. It was against Fiziev in the 5th round, but that was a really good fight. And I think Fiziev was having all he could handle from RDA, especially I think RDA stepped in potentially on short notice for that fight and looked good and gave Rafael Fiziev all he could handle for a long time. So, and Moicano's stock has risen now since 2022. And, getting a win over him shows that he can still do that. RDA can do at this level. So I know Moicano's 55, Luque is 70, Barberena was 70. Fiziev was 55. Yeah, 55. So, I may potentially against my better judgment, I'm going with Rafael dos Anjos at the ripe old age of 38 to get it done. So with that being said, I'm going to hop into our pick rundown, give you our picks, and we're going to get out of here on this short episode of Pickin Fights. So I am going prelim notables. I am taking Martin Abude to get the win over Josh Parisian, and I think he could get that done by finish. Josh Parisian isn't that durable, but both of these guys, I could see them gassing out and no one getting finished and kind of limping to a decision. I see Terence McKinney getting back on track and knocking out Mike Breeden in the 1st or the 2nd round. I see Marcus McGee getting a win over JP Bays. And Josh Fremd is going to get it done over Jamie Pickett as the main event, main card opener. AJ Dobson, I'm taking to get the win over Tafon and Chickwe. I'm going to pick Yasmine Lucindo to get the dub over Pollyanna Vienna, although that one is a coin flip. I think Khalil Roundtree is going to have too much for Chris Dawkins. I just think Chris Dawkins hasn't found a home at the UFC. I think he's not good enough to compete at the top echelon of heavyweight, and I think he's maybe just not fast enough or well-equipped stand-up wise to compete at 205. Doesn't have enough power to put some of those faster guys out at 205. Who also possess some crazy power. Hakeem Dawud is just younger, faster, quicker than Cub Swanson here. So I think he's going to get that done. Cub Swanson, 38, 39 years old. You can get away with it being older the more you weigh. Coming in at 135 pounds or 145 pounds, I think being 38, 39 there is a lot different than being 38, 39 at 170 pounds, because I think RDA is going to get it done in the main event. Thanks so much if you had watched from the beginning to the end. We really do appreciate all the views and the comments. If you did watch from the beginning to the end, or even just drop by or to check in on one fight that you wanted some information on, go ahead and drop us a like. We really do appreciate it. And give us a comment. What do you think of our picks? How have you been betting? What have you found? And what do you think of some of these guys who are fighting on this card? Do you want to see fights in the Apex, or do you want to see the UFC travel around? Do you care about if there's Wednesday cards or not? Do you even remember if there was Wednesday cards or not? All stuff that we would like to know. So let us know in the comment section below. And again, if you haven't already, please drop us a subscribe, whatever the terminology is. We've been doing this for 2 years. Still don't know what I'm supposed to be saying or not. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Pickin Winners. I'm Pickin Fights Tom. You can see that right in the bottom right corner of the screen. Like I said, what do you think of our picks? Leave us a comment and let us know. And of course, if you consume your content on the go, we have all of our episodes available on Spotify so that you can listen in your car. Appreciate you sticking through and talking about UFC. I don't even know if they number them anymore, but it's UFC Fight Night. Yeah, I can't find a number here anymore. So UFC Fight Night, Luque versus Dos Anjos. There are the picks. Have a good week, everybody. I hope you enjoyed the video, and be easy.